Amina woke before dawn each day, long before the first light touched the dusty rooftops of her small town. She lay in bed for a moment, listening to the soft breaths of her mother, Leela, who slept on the cot beside her. The wooden floor creaked. As Amina slipped out of bed, careful not to wake the older woman, she wrapped her blanket tighter around herself and padded across the room, toward the little kitchen. A single, narrow window let in a faint silver light. The air smelled of dry earth and cooking wood. Amina filled a small kettle with water and set it on the tiny stove. While the water warmed, she carried her mother's worn shoes to the small shelf by the door and polished them with an old cloth. The shoes were scuffed and frayed at the seams, but Leela wore them proudly each time she went to an interview. Amina rubbed the leather until it gleamed, imagining that they would look brand new in the bright light of the city office building where her mother hoped to work. Steam rose from the kettle, and Amina poured a cup of sweet tea, adding just enough sugar to remind her of better days. Outside, a rooster crowed. The town was quiet except for the distant rumble of a bus engine and the soft calls of a street vendor selling fresh bread. Amina carried the tea back to Leela's bed and gently shook her shoulder. "Mama, wake up," she whispered. "It is time." Leela's eyes opened, soft and tired. She sat up and placed her hands on her thin shoulders, rubbing them with a sigh. "Thank you, my dear," she said, her voice rough from exhaustion. Amina helped her mother stand. Together they washed their faces in the chipped sink with cold water. The mirror above was cracked, but it still reflected Leela's determined eyes. She straightened her simple blouse and smoothed the pleats of her skirt. Amina stood by, holding Leela's favorite necklace on, old silver locket, with faded engravings that her grandmother had given her long ago. Leela fastened it around her neck and smiled at her daughter. "You look ready," Amina said, fighting the lump in her throat. Leila nodded. "All I need now is luck." They stepped out into the morning light. The sun was a glowing circle rising behind the low hills, casting long shadows across the dusty road. Leela clutched her small leather bag close, inside which she carried her resume and some freshly baked bread to keep her strength. Amina walked alongside her mother, her heart pounding. She watched the path they had walked together so many times, from home to the small bus stop at the edge of town. The bus ride was always difficult. It rumbled along narrow roads, its paint peeling and its engine coughing. Most days, Leila could not afford the fare, and Amina would slip her mother to coins she had saved from her allowance. They walked most of the way, stopping only when Leila's legs ached too much to continue. But today was different. This interview could change everything. If Leila got the job, she would earn enough to pay off some of their debts, fix the roof that leaked when it rained, and even buy more food so they did not go to bed hungry. Amina watched her mother's back as she climbed onto the bus. Leila turned and gave her a small wave. Amina returned it, and the bus door closed with a bang. The bus pulled away, leaving a swirl of dust behind. Amina stood on the roadside until the dust settled, then walked home with slow steps. She knew she would wait all day for Leila's return. Back at home, it felt emptier than ever. The small room stood silent, save for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Amina washed the breakfast dishes and tried to read a school book, but her mind wandered. She thought about her mother's gentle smile, the way she pressed her teacup to her lips before speaking, and how her eyes sparkled with hope despite the hard work and disappointment she faced. Leila had been to many interviews. She cleaned offices, homes, and even the offices of officials, who never noticed how carefully she dusted their desks or polished their floors. She was proud of her work. She took pride in every broom sweep and every scrub of the sink. But her employers never seemed to see her skill. They would promise to call, then never pick up the phone. Month after month, Leila came home empty-handed, her shoulders heavy with worry. The bills piled up on the table, and the landlord's letters became more frequent. As the hours passed, Amina moved quietly around the room. She watered the small plant in the corner, a gift from her school's science fair, hoping the green leaves would remind Leila that growth still happened, even in hard soil. She folded a small pile of clothes, tucking away the ones Leila had patched and repatched until they were almost too thin to wear. Amina's own school uniform waited neatly on a chair. She knew she would need it when she left for classes, though. Her grades had slipped lately as she worried more and more about her family's troubles. The sun climbed higher, and the dusty window warmed the room. Amina sat by the window and watched the bus come and go, waiting to see if Lila would step off with a smile. She imagined her mother in a smart suit, carrying a new briefcase, stepping into an office building with bright lights and air conditioning. She pictured Layla greeting the receptionist with confidence, telling her story as she had practiced, how she cleaned with care, how she organized supplies, how she cared for every corner until it felt like new. But the hours passed without news. The clock's hands seemed to move in slow circles. Mina pressed her forehead to her arms on the windowsill and closed her eyes. She whispered a prayer for her mother's courage and for her own strength. Suddenly, the bus door hissed open. Amina sat up quickly and watched Leela step onto the dusty road. Her mother's blouse was wrinkled, and her face was pale. She carried her leather bag, but her shoulders sagged. Amina's heart sank. She ran. To meet her, her feet kicking up little puffs of dust. "Mama?" she called softly. Leela stopped and looked at her daughter. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "They did not even let me in," she said in a quiet voice. They said the position was filled. Amina's heart broke in her chest. She took her mother's hand and led her inside. She poured a cup of tea and pressed it into Leela's hands. Leela sipped it slowly and stared at the floor. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I failed you again." "You did not fail me," Amina said gently. "You tried your best." She thought of all the times her mother had worked late into the night, mopping floors until her hands were raw, sewing uniforms so Amina could look neat at school, waking early to make them tea. "You are the strongest person I know," Lila closed her eyes and leaned back. A tear rolled down her cheek. Amina brushed it away. She hated seeing her mother cry. She hated that life had become so hard for both of them. That night, they ate a small dinner of rice and vegetables. The lamp's yellow glow filled the room, and the shadows danced on the walls. After they cleared the plates, Amina climbed onto her mother's cot and wrapped her arms around her. "I wish there was something I could do to help," she said, her voice trembling. Leela kissed the top of her daughter's head. "My brave girl," she said softly. "Just being here with me helps more than you know." Mina lay awake for a long time that night. She listened to her mother's steady breathing and thought about all the interviews that had ended in disappointment. She thought about the empty bus rides and the landlord's demands. She thought about the school fees she was falling behind. And the promise she had made to her grandmother to finish her education. Finally, she sat up in bed and dug into the pocket of her skirt. She pulled out a small handful of coins, the money she had saved for a new school book she wanted. She looked at the coins, then at her mother. A plan formed in her mind, and her heart pounded with both fear and hope. She would do something brave for her mother. She would stand in Leela's place if she had to. She would walk into that office building, hold her mother's resume in her hand, and tell her mother's story herself. Amina closed her eyes and imagined the next morning. She imagined the bright building, the fancy receptionist desk, and the important man who would read the resume. She imagined telling him about her mother's hard work and loyalty. Above all, she imagined a future where Leela came home with good news and where Amina could finally sleep without worry. With that dream in her mind, she lay back down and let sleep carry her away. ChatGPT said. Amina woke early before the sky turned pink. Her heart pounded as she slipped from bed and tiptoed to the small mirror over the sink. She stared at her reflection, imagining the face of her mother, Leela, who lay feverish on the cat beside her. Last night Leela's cheeks burned and she could barely speak. The mosquito net above her bed had kept the worst of the insects away, but it could not keep out the tiredness or the cold sweat that rolled down her forehead. Amina touched her mother's ankle. She was so thin and pale. Layla moaned softly. In her sleep, guilt and worry formed knots in Amina's chest. She had watched her mother struggle for so long. This morning mattered more than any other. If Lila could not tell her story, they would lose the one chance they had at a stable job and an income that would lift their family out of worry. Amina thought of the broken roof over their heads, the bills that piled up like dirty dishes. and the worry lines that had begun to crease her mother's eyes. Taking a deep breath, Amina moved to her mother's small wardrobe. She opened the door and saw Leela's best blouse, now hanging limp on a plastic hanger. It was a pale blue shirt with small buttons down the front. It had been clean only a day ago, but now it looked wrinkled and a little damp from the night's fever. Amina smoothed the fabric gently and hung it on the back of the door. Below it lay a long skirt, dark gray with a faint pattern. It was one of the only 2 skirts her mother owned. Amina shook her head. She could not let fear stop her. She had spent the afternoon yesterday measuring herself against her mother so that the clothes would fit. She borrowed a hairpin and pinned her dark hair into a neat bun, just as her mother did. She brushed her own loose strands into place with care. Next, she slipped her feet into Leela's shoes, the shoes she had polished the night before. They smelled faintly of polish and of the dusty road outside. The shoes were too big in the heel, but she stepped carefully, making certain she would not betray her secret with a stumble. She carried the blouse and skirt to where she could change. In the cramped bathroom, she removed her own simple tunic and skirt. She knelt on the cold tile floor and tried to button the blouse. Her fingers trembled, but she managed. The blouse felt loose around her shoulders, but she pulled it tight and tucked the shirt into the waistband of the skirt. She fastened the skirt at her waist, careful to smooth out the wrinkles. Looking in the mirror again, she saw someone who might pass for Leela at a quick glance. Amina's stomach fluttered as she remembered the letters on the paper on the table. Downstairs, her mother's resume lay on the kitchen counter, next to a small loaf of bread and a half-empty mug of chai. She walked downstairs slowly. The wooden steps creaked under her weight. She reached the bottom and took the printed paper. Between her fingers, her mother had poured so much effort into that resume. The ink was already smudged in places where Leela's shaking hand had held the pen too long. There were small lines of text describing every place Leela had worked, the 5 homes she cleaned, the 2 offices she left spotless, the 1 school, where she polished the floors until they shone under the fluorescent lights. There were dates and letters of recommendation scribbled at the bottom, promising her patience and thoroughness. Amina clutched the paper to her chest. She folded it once, then twice, slipping it into the inner pocket of her blouse. She did not want to lose it. She brushed past the small table where the bread waited. The bread was still warm, fresh from the bakery yesterday. She tucked the loaf into her bag as well, knowing she might need something to calm her stomach once the nerves kicked in. Outside, the air was crisp. Amina took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the smell of dust and distant rain. She wiped her sweaty palms on her skirt and picked up her bag. Then she slipped quietly out the door. She paused on the step, as if to glance back, but the small wooden house stood empty and silent. She steeled herself and walked down the dusty road toward the bus stop. The bus stop was little more than a patch of gravel with a leaning metal pole. A faded sign swung in the light breeze. Amina arrived just as the first bus of the morning lumbered into view. Its engine coughed and sputtered. As it slowed, the driver glanced at her through the dusty window as she climbed the steps. She dropped 2 coins into the rusty fare box and took a seat near the front, clutching the bag that held her mother's resume and the fresh bread. Amina felt her forward. Amina felt her stomach twist. Every jolt sent her blouse shifting. Against her chest, she closed her eyes tightly and remembered her mother's words last night. Leela had squeezed her hand and whispered, "If I cannot do this, you must try for me. You are strong, and you have my heart with you." Those words had filled Amina with both pride and fear. She did not know if she could pretend to be her mother. The bus rattled down narrow streets, passing small shops with broken windows and stray dogs that trotted alongside. Few passengers stared at her. She tried to keep her face calm. She counted the stops in her mind, hoping she would not miss the one where she should get off. When the bus hit a bump, the bread slipped in her bag, and she cursed softly. She reached in to steady it, her fingers brushing the folded resume. She felt the paper and squeezed it, as if to remind herself of the promise she had made. Finally, the bus stopped near a tall building with shiny glass windows. A golden plaque next to the revolving door declared the name of the company, Rainer Enterprises. Amina swallowed as she stepped off the bus. Her shoes clicked on the pavement. She straightened her back, pretending she had a right to be here. She pressed the door button and entered the lobby. Inside, the air was cool, and the lights were bright. A carpet of deep blue covered the floor. A large desk sat at the center, and behind it, a woman in a neat suit looked up. The receptionist's eyes flicked to Amina's blouse and her loose hairpin. She raised an eyebrow, but remained polite. "Good morning," Amina said in her mother's calm voice. She hoped it sounded natural. "I am here for the interview with Mr. Patel at 9. The woman checked her schedule on a small computer. "Miss Lala Khan?" she asked. Amina nodded. She placed her bag on the desk and handed over a small card with her mother's name. The receptionist typed quickly. "Please have a seat," she said, gesturing to a row of chairs to the side. "He will see you shortly." Amina sat down. Her legs shook, and she held her bag tightly on her lap. She glanced at her watch. 8:45. 15 minutes to go. 15 minutes to collapse under fear or stand tall under hope. She looked around the lobby. Polished marble floors, tall plants in silver pots, a water dispenser humming quietly in the corner. It all felt unreal. She thought of her mother's hands, strong yet gentle, sweeping floors, carrying buckets of water, dusting shelves. She thought of the letters of recommendation on the resume, words praising Leela's honesty, hard work, and kind heart. She thought of her own small hands, folded in her lap, and the way her own school uniform hung in her bedroom at home, waiting for her. The clock on the wall ticked forward. A woman in a bright dress walked past, heading for an office ahead. Then the door behind the receptionist clicked open. A tall man in a suit stepped out. He looked at Amina with a polite smile. "Is Khan?" Amina stood and nodded. Her heart thundered so loudly she thought he would hear it. She took a steadying breath and walked toward him. Each step felt heavy, but she kept going. "Duh." She placed her bag on the floor and held out her hand. When she heard his voice say, "Please come in," she forced her shoulders back and walked through the open door. Inside, the office was bright and modern. A large desk sat in the center, and behind it sat Mr. Patel, the billionaire who ran the company. Amina felt the door click shut behind her. Her stomach twisted, and her palms grew sweaty again. She forced a small, polite smile. Then he spoke, looking at her with a curious gaze. "Ms. Khan, thank you for coming. I've read your resume. Tell me more about your experience." Amina opened her mouth, ready to speak her mother's words. She felt the paper in her blouse pocket, felt the weight of all her mother's hard work. She closed her eyes for a moment, then spoke. "I have cleaned many offices and homes," she began, using her mother's calm tone. "I have learned to work carefully, to notice every corner and every detail. I keep things organized so that people can work in peace. I work quietly and honestly, and I always arrive on time." Her voice sounded small in the large room, but Mr. Patel nodded, leaning forward with interest. Amina pushed down her fear and continued, telling him about the letters of recommendation, the days she had worked when her mother was too tired to stand, and the pride Leela felt in her work. When she finished, silence hung for a moment. Amina looked at Mr. Patel's face, trying to read his expression. He smiled kindly and stood. "Thank you, Ms. Khan," he said softly. "I appreciate your honesty. I have a few more questions about leadership, responsibility, and reliability." "Are you ready?" Amina straightened. She nodded, though her heart raced. She realized she was halfway through the greatest challenge of her young life. Outside the door, the lobby lights glowed softly. Inside, Amina took a deep breath and prepared to speak once more. Standing tall for her mother, in a place where hope and promise waited, ChatGPT said. Amina sat straight in the chair as Mr. Patel leaned forward. His dark eyes held kindness, but also quiet intensity. She reached into her blouse pocket and felt the folded resume, a small paper slip that held all her mother's hard work. She forced her breathing to slow and met his gaze. "Leadership," Mr. Patel began, "is not only about giving orders, it's about taking responsibility when things go wrong. Tell me about a time you had to solve a problem on your own." Amina closed her eyes for a moment and thought of last month when the rainstorm flooded the basement of the small house they rented. Water seeped through cracks in the wall, soaking their belongings. Layla had been too tired from work to handle it all. Amina remembered how she grabbed buckets, towels, and a mop, and spent hours pumping water out of the floor. She recalled how her arms ached, but she did not stop until the water receded. Opening her eyes, she spoke in a steady voice. Last month, heavy rain flooded our basement. My mother was too weak from her fever to help. I had to act quickly. I gathered buckets and towels, and I removed the water before our things were ruined. I stayed until the floor was dry, even though my hands cramped and my back ached. I did not leave until I knew our home was safe. Mr. Patel nodded and scribbled notes on a pad. That shows resilience, he said, but what about teamwork? In this company, you'll work with others. How do you handle working in a group? Amina thought of the cleaning crew at the school where Leela once worked. There had been 4 women, each assigned different areas: hallways, classrooms, restrooms, and the cafeteria. One day a spill in the cafeteria spread to the hallway, and no one was sure whose job it was. Chaos broke out as each cleaner thought someone else would handle it. The students were coming back in 15 minutes. Without waiting for instructions, Leela had grabbed one end of a mop handle and motioned to her teammates. Mina remembered how her mother stood firm, giving clear direction. She at first felt shy, but then grabbed the other end. Together, they worked quickly, with one woman laying down warning signs and another wiping walls. They finished just as the first students returned, and the principal complimented them for their speed. Amina spoke softly. When there was a big spill at my mother's school job, the team was confused about who would mop. My mother took charge. She asked each person to help in a clear way. I helped too. We worked together and we finished before the students came. My mother showed me that teamwork is about clear roles and helping each other. Mr. Patel looked up, impressed. He paused, folding his hands on the desk. The office felt very quiet. Amina could hear her own heartbeat. Beyond the glass window behind Mr. Patel, she saw the busy city street, cars honking and people hurrying by. Inside the room, time seemed slow, as if everything depended on her next words. Thank you, he said softly. One last question. We value honesty above all. Tell me why you came here today. Amina's throat tightened. She had practiced this answer many times in front of the faded mirror at home. She could use the lines her mother had taught her. I am here to work hard, to learn, and to support the team. But those words felt empty now. She looked down at the resume in her pocket, the one that bore her mother's name and her mother's history. A heavy knot formed in her chest. She swallowed and looked up. I must tell you the truth, she said, her voice trembling. Mr. Patel's eyebrows rose in surprise, but he did not interrupt. I am not Leela Khan. Her words fell in the room like stones. Mr. Patel's eyes widened. Amina took a shaky breath and kept going. My mother, Leela, was scheduled for this interview today. She is very ill with a fever. She cannot come out of bed. She asked me to come in her place. I wore her clothes and used her name because I did not want to lose this chance. I brought her resume because I believe in her experience and her dedication. Amina's eyes stung with tears she would not allow to fall. She watched Mr. Patel's face closely. He looked at her with surprise, then curiosity. She pressed on, speaking quickly now. I know it was wrong to pretend. I am sorry. But I could not stand by and watch my mother lose another chance. She has cleaned offices and homes with care for years, and yet no one listens to her story. I wanted you to know who she is because her work matters. Silence stretched between them. Amina's shoulders shook. She feared anger or dismissal. She braced for the worst. After a long moment, Mr. Patel leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. He studied her face, then the invisible weight she carried. Finally, he spoke in a calm voice. Thank you for your honesty, Amina. Her breath caught at the sound of her own name spoken in that room. She nodded, unable to speak. Mr. Patel continued. Leela Khan's resume shows someone with dedication, reliability, and a strong work ethic. But your courage in admitting the deception shows something even more important. Honesty and integrity are core to our values. Amina's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked to keep them in. She nodded again, unsure she had heard correctly. Mr. Patel stood and walked around his desk. He stood in front of her. The distance was small, but it felt as if he were closing the gap between fear and hope. "I want to offer 2 positions," he said. "First, we need someone part-time to help with cleaning and organizing our back offices. You will help us begin next week. Second, once your mother recovers, I want her to join us full-time. We'll support her health and work schedule so she can rest when she needs to." Amina stared at him, unable to believe her ears. "Are you sure?" she managed to whisper. Mr. Patel smiled warmly. "Yes, you both deserve this opportunity. You showed me what this job and this company should value. Hard work, care for details, teamwork, resilience, and above all, honesty." Amina rose too. Her feet, her legs weak. She swallowed and nodded. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice thick with emotion. He offered his hand, and she took it with trembling fingers. His handshake was firm and kind. She stepped out of the office. The lobby felt brighter than before. Amina clutched the bag that held her mother's resume and the fresh bread. She felt a rush of relief and excitement. The receptionist looked up and smiled at her, and Amina returned the smile. She did not need to pretend anymore. As she walked back through the revolving door, the city's sun felt warm on her face. She breathed deeply, tasting freedom. In her mind, she saw her mother lying on the cot at home, waiting for news. Amina imagined the smile that would spread across her mother's face when she heard the story. She pictured Leela's eyes lighting up, her hands trembling with joy, and the small silver locket swinging at her neck. Amina hurried toward the bus stop, her shoes clicking on the pavement. Each step felt light, as if she were walking on air. She clutched the loaf of bread in her bag, the same bread she had packed for her mother's strength. Now, it felt like a symbol of their shared journey. When the bus pulled up, she climbed aboard and paid her fare without hesitation. She found a seat and watched the tall buildings slide past the window. She thought of the part-time job waiting for her, the full-time role for her mother, in the brighter days ahead. With her heart full of hope, Amina pressed her forehead against the cool glass and closed her eyes. She whispered a silent prayer of thanks and promised herself she would make the most of this chance for her mother and for herself. And so, with courage in her heart and honesty on her lips, Amina began the journey home, ready to share the news that would change their lives forever. The bus rocked gently as it moved through the streets. Amina sat by the window, her hands holding tightly onto her bag. She didn't care about the dusty glass or the noise around her. Her mind was full of one thought: how to tell her mother everything that had just happened. She had walked into that big glass office with fear in her heart, but now she was leaving with something more powerful than fear. She was leaving with hope. As the bus passed small shops and street corners, Amina looked out and saw familiar faces. A boy selling flowers, a woman selling boiled corn, and a shoe shiner calling out for customers. This was her neighborhood, her people, her life. Everything looked the same, yet everything felt different inside her. She had done something brave. Today, she had stood up, spoken the truth, and it had changed everything. When the bus finally stopped near her street, Amina got off quickly. The road to her house was dry and warm. The sun was now high, and the heat touched her forehead, but she didn't slow down. She walked with fast steps, her heart beating harder as she came closer to home. As she turned the corner, she saw her house small, with a tin roof and walls that needed paint. But to her, it was home. She pushed open the wooden door slowly, not wanting to wake her mother if she was still asleep. Inside, the room was quiet. The smell of boiled herbs hung in the air. Amina stepped inside and placed her bag gently on the floor. Her eyes went straight to the cot. Layla was awake. She sat up slowly, leaning against a folded blanket for support. Her face looked pale but calmer than before. Her fever had gone down a little, and her eyes searched Amina's face with worry. Layla whispered, her voice. It was soft and dry. "Did you go?" Amina nodded and moved closer. She sat on the edge of the cot and took her mother's hand in both of hers. "Yes, Mama," she said gently. I wore your clothes. I gave them your resume." Leela's eyes widened. She opened her mouth, but no words came out at. First, Amina smiled softly. I know, it was risky. But I couldn't let you miss this chance, so I told them everything. I told Mr. Patel that you were sick. I told him about your hard work, your dedication. I told him the truth.
Alas.
Lips parted. He didn't get angry? Amina shook her head. No, Mama. He was surprised, yes. But then he smiled. Said honesty is important in his company. He said the resume shows how special you are. And then Mina stopped for a second, letting the words come slowly. He offered me a part-time job. Just until you recover. And he said when you feel better, you can start your full-time position. He wants to help us both. Tears rolled down Leela's cheeks as she listened. Her lips trembled, but this time they formed a smile. She squeezed Amina's hands with the little strength she had left. My daughter, she whispered, you are braver than I ever knew. You stood in my place, and you told the truth. I'm so proud of you. Mina leaned in and hugged her mother gently. She felt the warmth of Leela's body, still weak from the fever, but filled now with something stronger joy. They sat like that for a while, just holding each other in silence. Later that afternoon, Amina prepared a light meal, some rice, lentils, and tea. She brought the food to her mother and sat beside her while she ate slowly. There were no words needed. The soft clinking of the spoon, the sunlight coming through the curtain, the quiet peace between them, it was all enough. That evening, Amina walked to the small shop on the corner. With the little money she had left, she bought some oranges and ginger, things that could help her mother heal faster. She walked home feeling stronger than she ever had. When night fell, they sat together on the small cot, and Amina told her mother every detail about the office. She described the shining floors, the tall glass windows, the kind receptionist, and the big desk where Mr. Patel had spoken with her. Leela listened like a child listening to a fairy tale. But this was not a fairy tale. This was real. This was their life-changing. The next day, Amina dressed in her own clothes again, and prepared for her first day at work. Her mother helped her fix her hair and handed her the same bag she had carried the day before. Remember? Leela said, smiling. You carry not just my resume, but my dreams too. Mina kissed her mother's forehead and left the house. At the office, she was welcomed kindly. The team showed her where the cleaning supplies were kept, and she was assigned to the back offices. She worked with quiet focus, just like her mother had taught her. She swept the corners, wiped down tables, and organized supply shelves. Every task reminded her of her mother's lessons: how to fold cloth neatly, how to clean without noise, how to notice the smallest detail. One of the older workers, a woman named Miss Tanya, watched Amina for a while and then said, You're new, but you work like someone who's been doing this for years. Amina smiled. My mother taught me everything I know. Miss Tanya nodded with approval. She must be a good woman, as Amina said with pride. She's the best. Days passed, and Amina returned home each evening with a little money and many stories to tell. Her mother's health improved day by day. With the new medicine, the fruits, and the warmth of good news, Lela began to walk around the house again. One morning, as Amina helped her mother sit up, Lela looked at her and said, I think I'm ready. Amina looked at her with surprise. Ready for what? For the job, Lela said gently. I want to go. I want to see the office for myself. The next week, Amina walked her mother to the same bus stop where she had once stood alone. This time, they stood side by side. Lila wore the same blouse, but it looked brighter now, ironed and neat. She held her bag close, and Amina could see a soft smile on her face. As the bus arrived, Amina helped her mother climb the steps. They sat side by side, looking out the window, their hands touching lightly on the seat between them. When they reached the building, the receptionist recognized Amina and smiled. You must be Layla, she said, standing. Leela nodded, her eyes wide with emotion. Mr. Patel came out personally to meet her. He shook her hand with both of his and said, We've been waiting for you. Amina watched from a distance as her mother walked into the same office. She had entered weeks before, this time not as someone pretending to be Leela but as the real Leela Khan, strong and proud. That evening, mother and daughter walked home together under the setting sun. The sky was painted orange and pink, and their shadows stretched long on the road ahead. Layla turned to Amina and said, "You gave me more than just a second chance. You gave me my voice back." Amina smiled. "You gave me everything first. Mama, I only returned the favor." And with that, they stepped into their small home, which no longer felt small at all but full of light, love, and the future waiting to be built, one honest step at a time. A few weeks passed, and life slowly began to change for Amina and Layla. The air inside their small home felt different, not heavy with worry, but light with peace. The little things that once caused stress, like an empty shelf or a cracked plate, no longer felt like a burden. There was quiet happiness in their routine now, and that was something Amina had never known before. Each morning, Layla woke up early, feeling stronger with every passing day. She would stretch her arms slowly and sit on the edge of her bed, smiling at Amina as she helped her get ready. The sickness that had once kept her weak had slowly faded away. The new job had given her more than just a salary. It had given her energy, purpose, and pride. Amina had become used to her part-time routine. She worked in the mornings, came home in the afternoon, and studied in the evenings. Her school teachers had started noticing a difference too. She raised her hand more, listened closely in class, and turned in assignments on time. Her classmates, who once teased her for being too quiet, now looked at her with new respect. On Friday afternoon, Amina returned home early. She had finished her cleaning shift and wanted to prepare something special. She stopped at the local market and bought 2 pieces of fresh fish, a small bag of rice, and a few ripe tomatoes. It wasn't much, but it was enough to cook one of Layla's favorite meals. At home, she peeled the tomatoes, washed the rice, and placed the fish in a pan with lemon, salt, and a little oil. The kitchen filled with a smell that brought memories, back of better times when Layla used to sing while cooking. Amina set the table neatly and waited. Layla came through the door at 5 o'clock sharp. Her cheeks were slightly flushed, and her steps were slower than Amina's. But she looked proud. She placed her bag down and smiled. "You cooked?" Layla asked, eyes twinkling. Amina nodded. "You've been cooking for me all my life. I thought I should do it today." They sat together and ate quietly, enjoying each bite. The warm rice, the soft fish, the fresh tomato gravy, all of it tasted better than any fancy dish. Layla closed her eyes after every few bites, chewing slowly, like she was savoring every flavor. After dinner, they washed the dishes together. Then Layla reached for a small envelope she had brought home. She handed it to Amina. "What's this?" Amina asked. "Open it." Inside the envelope was a handwritten note. It was from Mr. Patel, the company head. It read, "Dear Layla, your work has brought cleanliness and joy to our office. More importantly, your story has reminded us of something important, that people like you are the real heroes of our company. Starting next month, we would like to promote you to a supervisor role. Your daughter Amina has also impressed everyone with her honesty and dedication. We are proud to have you both. Sincerely, R. Patel." Amina stared at the note in silence. Layla's hand gently touched hers. "I never expected this," Layla whispered. "I was just happy to have a job. I never thought I'd be seen, really seen." Amina's eyes filled with quiet tears. "You've always deserved to be seen, Mama. The world just took a while to notice." That weekend, they cleaned the whole house, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They scrubbed the windows, swept the floors, and even fixed the loose drawer in the kitchen. As they worked, they laughed. Amina played music from her phone, and for the first time in many months, Layla danced. Her movements were slow and careful, but her smile was full and wide. One evening, Layla sat down with Amina and opened a notebook. "This is something I've been thinking about," she said. "I want to teach other women how to clean professionally. Not just mop floors, but how to write resumes, how to speak in interviews, how to take pride in their work." Amina's eyes lit up. "That's a beautiful idea," Layla nodded. "There are so many women like me, hardworking but invisible. If I can help just one woman find a job, then I've done something right." They began planning together. Amina wrote down ideas while Layla spoke. They talked about starting a weekend workshop at the community center. Layla would teach the practical part, and Amina would help with reading, writing, confidence-building. Within a month, their plan turned into reality. 5 women from their neighborhood came to the first workshop. They listened closely as Leela showed them how to organize supplies, how to clean safely, and how to speak with dignity. Amina watched the women's eyes light up when they learned something new. She helped them write their names on paper, some of them for the very first time. Word began to spread. By the end of the second month, more than a dozen women had joined. Some brought their daughters too. Community Center had never seen so much energy and hope in one room. Mr. Patel heard about the workshops and visited one Saturday. He walked in quietly and watched as Leela guided a group through a mock interview. When the session ended, he clapped. "You've built something very special," he told her. "You've turned your struggle into strength, and now you're giving it." 2 others. Lila smiled, holding Amina's hand. "I had help," she said proudly. "It's from my daughter. She gave me the strength to stand again." The workshops became a weekly tradition. Amina balanced her schoolwork, job, and teaching duties with ease. The bond between her and her mother grew stronger with each day. They were no longer just mother and daughter. They were partners, builders of something meaningful. On the first anniversary of Leela's job, Mr. Patel held a small ceremony at the company office. He stood in front of all the staff and shared the story of how a young girl walked into an interview pretending to be her mother, not to cheat, but to protect her. He shared how the truth came out, and instead of anger, it led to something beautiful. Everyone clapped. Some had tears in their eyes. Layla received a golden badge for service and dedication. Amina received a letter of recommendation for college. Mr. Patel said one final line that stayed with everyone in the room. "Sometimes greatness doesn't walk in wearing a suit. Sometimes it walks in wearing borrowed shoes and tells the truth when it's hardest." That evening, Amina and Lila stood outside the office building looking up at the tall glass windows. The same building that once looked so big and far away now felt like home. Amina turned to her mother. "Can you believe it, Mama? It all started with a simple piece of paper. Your resume." Layla nodded, her eyes shining. "It wasn't just a paper, it was my story. And you gave me the courage to let someone read it." They walked home hand in hand, their steps steady and their hearts light. Behind them, the city lights sparkled, and ahead of them, the road stretched wide and open. Their journey wasn't over, it was just beginning. But now, they walked it together, proud, strong, and full of hope.